A 38-year-old mother abandoned her 3 children for a 6-day party trip with her 26-year-old millionaire boyfriend. While she was living large in Miami's luxury nightlife, her children were left behind in a small Atlanta apartment with no father, no supervision, and almost no food. And when investigators finally opened that door, what they found inside was something the world was never meant to see. A secret that changed everything. Selena Harris was 40 years old, but she moved through the world like a woman who refused to fade. Her hair was perfectly styled, her nails polished, and her clothes carefully chosen to project the image of a woman in control. Neighbors often whispered that she looked more like someone who belonged in Buckhead boutiques than in a rundown apartment on the east side of Atlanta. Glamorous on the outside, but boxed into a life that felt smaller with every passing year. The reality behind those doors told a different story. The walls were thin, the paint chipped, the kitchen dimly lit by a buzzing fluorescent bulb. Bills lay scattered across the counter, each one marked urgent. The fridge hummed quietly, nearly empty. This was not the life Selena wanted others to see, but it was the life her 3 children lived inside every day. Jalen, just 7 years old, had already learned to carry himself like a man. He was the one who fetched food for his little sister, the one who rocked his baby brother when the crying wouldn't stop, the one who tried to protect the others from the tension in the air. Childhood had been stolen from him long before he could understand what he had lost. Emily was 5, small, watchful, almost too quiet for her age. She kept to herself, often clutching her stuffed bunny so tightly its fur had gone thin. The toy was her shield against the fear of hunger and the unspoken worry about whether tomorrow would feel any safer than today. Micah was only 20 months old, still a baby, still innocent. He had no words for his world yet, only cries and laughter, reaching arms and soft babbles. But even his tiny body had already begun to learn the rhythm of scarcity. This was their reality, 3 children with no fathers in the picture, depending entirely on a mother who was barely holding herself together. And yet, despite the cracks in her world, Selena glowed. She carried herself as if she were meant for more, as if one twist of fate could place her exactly where she believed she belonged, surrounded by wealth, adored, envied. The children adored her. To them, she wasn't just glamorous, she was everything. They clung to her presence, even when that presence was distracted, even when her gaze drifted toward a future that didn't include them. That evening, the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the faint sound of cartoons from the living room. Jalen was kneeling on the floor, dividing the last sandwich into 3 small portions, trying to make it look fair. Emily sat cross-legged beside him, clutching her bunny and pretending the tiny piece she held was enough. Micah reached with chubby fingers, thrilled by the smallest bite. It was a tender moment, almost beautiful in its simplicity. 3 children comforting each other, surviving together in ways no child should have to. And just a few feet away, Selena sat on the couch, legs crossed neatly, bills fanned out across the coffee table. Her face was unreadable, her eyes heavy with calculation. The weight of debt, loneliness, and longing pressed on her shoulders. To an outsider, she looked composed, but inside, her thoughts were restless, always searching for a way out. That was when it happened. Her phone buzzed. The sound was sharp, cutting through the silence like a strike of lightning. The glow of the screen lit up her polished nails as she reached for it, and in that moment, something shifted. Her lips parted into a smile. Not the strained, polite smile she wore for the world, but a real one. It was the kind of smile that hinted at secrets, the kind that came from being noticed, wanted, chosen. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, her face softened. Jalen noticed the change from across the room, though he didn't understand it. Emily's eyes followed her mother's every move. Even baby Micah stilled, sensing a change in the air. None of them knew what that message meant. None of them could imagine what it would set into motion. The phone buzzed again. Another message, another spark of excitement. What Selena read on that screen was more than a distraction from overdue bills. It was an opening, a door to another life. And the decision she would make after reading those words would not just alter her future. It would transform the lives of the 3 small children sitting on that floor forever. That text would change everything. On the other end of Selena Harris's phone was Derek Vaughn, only 26 years old, already a millionaire, and about to offer her exactly what she thought she wanted. But before that moment in her cramped apartment, the story had begun 3 months earlier. A night in Atlanta that would become the seed of her obsession. It was late spring when Selena first saw him. The nightclub pulsed with bass, neon lights sliding across polished floors, the air thick with perfume and expensive liquor. Selena stood out as she always did, glamorous, striking, refusing to blend into the shadows of her surroundings. She carried herself like a woman who belonged to the spotlight. Then came Derek. He didn't just enter the room, he dominated it. The kind of man who drew every gaze without needing to speak. His car, a sleek black Lamborghini, had been parked outside like a beacon. His clothes screamed wealth, tailored jacket, designer sneakers, a watch that glittered under the lights. And yet it wasn't just the surface. Derek carried himself with the ease of someone used to being the most important person in the room. Selena noticed him before he noticed her, but when their eyes finally met, it was like the rest of the room disappeared. He was younger, yes, but he exuded something that Selena craved: power, escape, the promise of a different life. Over the weeks that followed, Derek made sure she saw more of the life he lived. He wasn't shy about it. Selena rode in his cars, glossy machines that purred like predators down Peachtree Street. She saw the way heads turned when they pulled up to restaurants. She stepped into his penthouse with its glass walls overlooking Atlanta, floors polished like mirrors, closets lined with designer labels she could only dream of owning. It was intoxicating. To a woman who had been scraping by for years, this world wasn't just luxury, it was oxygen. Every time Derek opened the door to his lifestyle, Selena breathed deeper, further away from the stale air of her apartment. The obsession grew. Derek represented not just a man, but an escape from every corner of her life that felt like failure. The way people looked at her when she stood next to him, as if she belonged in his world, was enough to make her forget the hungry eyes waiting for her at home. And then the invitation came. It was spontaneous, like everything in Derek's life. Miami. 6 days of parties, yachts, and luxury, a world far from the cracked sidewalks of East Atlanta. A getaway where Selena could slip fully into the woman she believed she was meant to be. But there was the unspoken cost. Miami meant leaving her children behind. Not for a night, not for a shift at work, for nearly a week. Selena's thoughts spiraled. She knew the risk. She knew what it meant to walk out of that apartment, leaving her children behind. Yet she also knew she couldn't let Derek slip through her hands. As the invitation echoed in her mind, Selena moved quietly through her home. The apartment was dim. Jalen had fallen asleep on the couch, one arm draped protectively over Emily, who clutched her stuffed bunny even in her dreams. Micah's soft breaths came from the crib in the corner, the faint sound of innocence that had no idea what was coming. Selena stood in the doorway with her suitcase, perfectly packed. Clothes chosen not for motherhood, but for glamour. For Miami. For Derek. Her eyes lingered on her children, their small bodies curled together, unaware of the storm about to break over them. And there in the stillness of that cramped apartment, Selena Harris stood at the threshold of a decision that would fracture her family forever. The morning of August 3rd arrived heavy with Georgia heat. Sunlight leaked through the blinds, stripes of gold cutting across a cluttered floor. Selena moved with urgency, her heels striking against the worn linoleum as she swept from room to room. A suitcase lay open on her bed, dresses and heels spread like evidence of the life she longed for. Bottles of perfume, glittering jewelry, and silk blouses waited to be zipped inside. She wasn't preparing for work. She wasn't preparing for motherhood. She was preparing for Miami. In the kitchen, Jalen poured the last of the cereal into 3 bowls, stretching what was left so Emily and Micah wouldn't notice how little there was. Emily sat silently, bunny in her lap, while Micah slapped his spoon against the high chair tray, laughing at crumbs. To them it was just another morning. To Selena, it was the final rehearsal. She moved mechanically, smoothing bills into drawers, testing the locks twice, turning off her phone. She opened the refrigerator, poured the remaining milk into Micah's cup, and shut the door without glancing back at the emptiness inside. The apartment smelled faintly of dust and old takeout, but Selena's perfume cut through it, the scent of escape. Her children's world shrank into that small table, 3 bowls, and a boy pretending to be the protector. Selena's world expanded with every item she packed, every step closer to Derek Vaughn's invitation. When the suitcase clicked shut, she bent over her children. Her movements were polished, her smile practiced. She kissed their foreheads with the air of routine, the performance of a mother leaving for another shift. But beneath the gloss, she knew the truth. She wasn't coming back tonight. Jalen looked up at her, eyes wide, trust written across his face. His voice was small, but it carried the weight of innocence. He told her he loved her. The words struck her like a blade, but she steadied her hand on the suitcase handle. Her phone vibrated again, Derek's name glowing on the screen. The pull was too strong. Miami was waiting. She walked to the door, heels echoing against cracked tiles, and locked it behind her. The sound of the bolt sliding into place was final. At Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, she blended into the tide of travelers, but in her mind, she had already arrived. Derek stood at the gate in a pressed suit, sunglasses reflecting fluorescent light. He was young, rich, untouchable, everything she had convinced herself she deserved. The boarding call came. Selena followed him down the jet bridge, suitcase rolling smoothly, her phone silent in her purse. The plane lifted into the sky, Atlanta shrinking beneath the clouds as champagne was poured into tall glasses. Selena's smile widened, painted by the promise of neon nights and ocean air. But back in that locked apartment, the cracks widened. Jalen tugged open the refrigerator, looking for more food. The dim bulb flickered against his face as he peered inside. What stared back was almost nothing. A jug of milk nearly gone, stale bread, and a jar of peanut butter scraped thin. The hum of the fridge was the only sound in the silence she left behind. And in that silence, the truth began to show itself. While Selena sipped champagne 30,000 feet above her children, back in Atlanta, 7-year-old Jalen was about to become the man of the house. The plane touched down in Miami, and Selena stepped into a world drenched in neon and salt air. Palm trees lined Ocean Drive, the hum of luxury cars circling past restaurants that glittered with glass and chrome. Derek led her into a waiting car, the leather seats cool against her skin, the engine purring with wealth. Hours later, they were seated at a table overlooking the beach, cocktails glowing pink in the fading light, plates of food arriving like works of art. Selena leaned back, soaking in the scene as though she had always belonged there. Her hotel room rose above Biscayne Bay, a wall of windows opening onto the ocean. The sheets were crisp, the minibar stacked with champagne bottles, the balcony catching the glow of the city below. She posed by the railing, hair swept by the breeze, snapping photos that would later sparkle across her social media feed. Every click of the camera erased a piece of the life she had left behind. But back in Atlanta, that life was very real. Jalen dragged a chair to the counter and searched the cabinets for food. The bread was already dry, the milk nearly gone. He tore small pieces, pressing them into Emily's hands, then softened the crust with water for Micah. He spoke softly to his siblings, though no comfort could disguise the hunger that sat heavy in their bellies. Night fell. Micah cried, his small body restless in the crib. Emily clutched her bunny tight, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Jalen climbed onto the bed beside his brother, humming a lullaby he barely remembered, his voice thin but steady. The sound carried through the apartment like a fragile shield against the emptiness pressing in from every wall. Meanwhile, Selena danced beneath the glow of a rooftop bar. Music thundered, glasses clinked, strangers admired the glamorous woman on the arm of a young millionaire. When she thought of her children, the thoughts came like faint ripples, quickly drowned by Derek's hand at her waist and the promise of another night she couldn't resist. Derek never asked about them. When her gaze drifted, when guilt flickered across her face, his silence was colder than words. Children didn't exist in his world, and if Selena wanted to stay in it, they couldn't exist in hers either. She posted a photo before midnight, sparkling dress, champagne glass in hand, city lights blazing behind her. To the world, she looked untouchable. To her children, she was gone. In the dark apartment, Jalen tucked Emily against his side, her small hand gripping his shirt as if he could anchor her to safety. Micah finally quieted, his tiny breaths uneven but steady. The silence that followed was heavy, a silence filled with waiting. And then Emily's voice broke it. Soft, uncertain, almost afraid to ask. She turned to her brother, eyes wide in the dim light, and whispered the question that had no answer. When is Mommy really coming home? By day 2, something had changed in that Atlanta apartment. The crying had stopped, and that silence was more terrifying than any scream. The food was almost gone. Jalen stood on a chair, searching high shelves as though something might appear if he looked hard enough. A stale crust of bread. Half a jar of peanut butter scraped to its bottom. A single apple turning soft in the corner of the fridge. He divided each piece with care, pushing the larger portions toward Emily and Micah, keeping the smallest for himself. But even sacrifice couldn't mask the truth. Micah's cries grew weaker, his once demanding wails fading into soft whimpers that barely carried through the room. His diapers overflowed, the smell sharp and sour in the heat, but Jalen did his best, dragging bags of trash to the door, pressing wipes to his brother's skin, humming lullabies through clenched teeth. Emily stayed quiet, too quiet. She curled on the floor with her stuffed bunny, holding it against her chest like it could keep her from vanishing into the hunger. She didn't speak much, only staring at Jalen with wide eyes, her silence heavier than words. By day 3, Jalen moved like an old man in a boy's body. He changed Micah's diapers with trembling hands, lifted him with arms too small for the weight, and pressed water into his lips, drop by drop. When Emily's stomach growled, he pretended he wasn't hungry. When her eyes filled with tears, he told her nothing was wrong, though every corner of the apartment screamed otherwise. And while the children sat in that suffocating quiet, Selena floated in another universe. Miami unfolded like a fever dream. Rooftop bars with pulsing music, boat parties drifting across turquoise water, expensive cocktails that disappeared as quickly as they came. She lounged on sun-soaked decks in designer sunglasses, laughing at jokes she barely listened to, her body draped in luxury while her mind kept pulling at threads of guilt. When she reached for her phone, the screen lit up with numbers she didn't recognize. 47 missed calls, each from the same unknown number. She locked the screen quickly, dropping the phone into her purse, burying the truth beneath another round of champagne. Derek never asked, never cared. To him, silence was proof of control. The fewer reminders of her real life, the better. Back in Atlanta, the quiet from apartment 4B was beginning to stir suspicion. Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived across the hall, paused in front of the door. Normally she heard the cries of the baby, the laughter of children, the shuffle of little feet. Now there was nothing. Day after day, nothing. She leaned closer, pressing her ear to the door, waiting for any sound at all. What she heard, or didn't hear, chilled her more than any cry could. And for the first time, someone outside those walls began to wonder what was happening to the children inside. By day 4, in Miami, Selena was living her best life. In Atlanta, her baby son Micah had stopped responding entirely. The Harris apartment had become a prison of silence and decay. Spoiled milk lingered in the refrigerator, its sourness heavy in the heat. Diapers overflowed in the corner, their stench pressing into every surface. The air was stale, heavy with the weight of children too weak to cry. Jalen struggled against it all. His small hands fumbled as he tried to change Micah, his arms shaking as he lifted his brother from the crib. He tipped the last drops of water against tiny lips, waiting for a swallow that came slowly, too slowly. He broke stale bread into smaller and smaller pieces, saving the thinnest crumbs for himself while pushing the rest toward his siblings. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, but he refused to stop moving. He believed that if he kept trying, he could hold the world together. Emily drifted in and out of awareness. She clutched her stuffed bunny so tightly its fabric frayed under her grip. Her eyes no longer followed her brother's movements. She sat motionless on the couch, her body curled inward, her breaths shallow. Words no longer came. Her silence was more haunting than Micah's fading cries. The apartment was collapsing around them. Every corner carried evidence of neglect, dishes stacked unwashed in the sink, trash tied in thin grocery bags, crumbs scattered on the floor. Jalen moved among the wreckage like a ghost, a child already too old, carrying responsibilities far beyond his years. Meanwhile, Miami gleamed like another planet. Selena strolled down Lincoln Road, sun flashing off storefront glass. Designer boutiques lined the street, mannequins dressed in silk and sequins. She stepped inside, her reflection caught in mirrored walls, her figure wrapped in glamour. She reached for a dress priced higher than her monthly rent and handed over Derek's card without hesitation. She was radiant, draped in gold ribbon and tissue paper, her smile framed by palm trees swaying in the breeze. Her phone buzzed with unread calls, 47 notifications glowing on the screen. She silenced them with a swipe, burying reality beneath luxury. Back in Atlanta, Jalen rocked Micah in his arms, humming a melody he barely remembered, his own stomach aching from hunger. Emily's stuffed bunny slipped from her hand, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Neither child had the strength to pick it up. Across the hall, Mrs. Rodriguez paused in front of 4B. The silence pressing through the door unsettled her. For days she had noticed the absence of sound, no crying, no laughter, no movement. Now it felt unbearable, as if the walls themselves were holding a secret. She stepped back into her apartment, lifted her phone, and began to dial. But the question remained. Who would she call first? When Mrs. Rodriguez made that call, she set in motion a chain of events that would expose one of Atlanta's most shocking cases of child abandonment. Her voice carried urgency as she spoke to Atlanta Child Protective Services. She explained the silence, the absence of children's cries, the days of unease that gnawed at her, but urgency did not guarantee action. The call was logged, the details taken, and the file shuffled into a system already burdened with countless emergencies. Hours stretched into a day, the children inside apartment 4B, still unseen, still unheard. Paperwork moved slowly. Calls were transferred, cases reassigned. Each bureaucratic delay widened the gap between survival and collapse. And inside that apartment, the gap was closing fast. What no one yet knew was that another voice had been trying to raise alarm. Marcus Williams, Micah's father, had sensed something was wrong. He hadn't heard from Selena in days, not even the occasional text she sent to keep him at arm's length. His calls rang unanswered, his messages unread. He reached out again and again until the silence itself became unbearable. His number was among the dozens logged in Selena's phone, buried under the weight of parties, shopping trips, and the life she had chosen in Miami. By day 5, the apartment had become a chamber of shadows. Jalen could barely stand, his body weakened by hunger and exhaustion. Emily lay curled on the couch, her stuffed bunny clutched to her chest like a lifeline, her breath shallow and uneven. Micah's condition was worse, his tiny chest rising with shallow gasps, his skin pale, his body limp in his brother's trembling arms. Finally, the system moved. Child Protective Services, spurred by Mrs. Rodriguez's persistence and the mounting concern from unanswered calls, arranged a welfare check. The request went to the Atlanta Police Department, officers dispatched with little knowledge of the horrors waiting behind the locked door. The hallway outside apartment 4B was silent when Officer Sarah Mitchell arrived. The weight of the building pressed down on her as she approached, her footsteps echoing off cracked tile. She paused, hand hovering near her radio, the stale air heavy with tension. And while she prepared to knock, 600 miles away, Selena Harris was laughing. The sun burned golden over a Miami beach club, champagne glasses clinking, music pounding, her hair catching the light like fire. She threw her head back, radiant, untouchable, oblivious to the darkness tightening its grip back in Atlanta. What Officer Sarah Mitchell found behind that locked door would haunt her for the rest of her career. And 600 miles away, Selena Harris had no idea her world was about to collapse. The officers arrived at apartment 4B just after dusk. The hallway was still, the air heavy with the faint smell of mildew and something sour seeping through the cracks. Officer Mitchell exchanged a brief glance with her partner, James Carter, before stepping closer to the door. They knocked, no response. They called out, nothing. The silence inside felt unnatural, suffocating. Decision was swift. With a sharp kick, the door splintered inward. What spilled out was not noise, but the absence of it, a silence broken only by shallow, uneven breaths. The apartment was in ruin. Diapers overflowed in the corner, sour milk soured the air, trash scattered across the floor. On the couch, 5-year-old Emily lay motionless, her stuffed bunny clutched in her small hands. In the crib, Micah was limp, his chest rising only in faint, fragile gasps. And on the floor nearby, Jalen knelt, his thin frame hunched, his face streaked with tears and dirt. He looked up at the officers with hollow eyes that carried the weight of a man twice his age. Emergency calls went out instantly. Paramedics surged into the room carrying stretchers, oxygen tanks, IV bags. Child Protective Services staff followed, their expressions tightening as they took in the devastation. Every second felt like a battle. Hands worked quickly over Micah's small body, checking his pulse, forcing air into his lungs. Emily was lifted gently, her limp arms falling to her sides. Jalen resisted the help at first, clinging to his siblings, his lips moving with words so faint the officers had to lean close to hear. He had tried to keep them alive. Every action, every scrap of food, every whispered song had been his fight against the silence. While Atlanta fought for the lives of 3 abandoned children, Miami glittered in another universe. Selena sat at Joe's stone crab, candlelight dancing over polished glasses of wine and platters piled high with seafood. Derek raised a toast, the skyline blazing behind him, while Selena smiled across the table, radiant in her new dress. To anyone watching, she was a woman who had everything: love, wealth, beauty. As paramedics worked frantically to stabilize Micah, Officer Mitchell stepped aside to receive a call. The order was clear. A bolo, be on the lookout, was being issued for Selena Harris. Her name, her face, her freedom, all now marked. The hunt for the mother had begun. While doctors at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta fought to save baby Micah's life, Miami-Dade police were closing in on the mother who had left him to die. At Grady Hospital, a team of specialists moved with precision and urgency. Micah was the smallest, the weakest, his body unresponsive, on the stretcher. Tubes were inserted, monitors strapped across his chest, machines forcing breath into fragile lungs. Every second was a gamble. The doctors whispered among themselves, their expressions grim, until one turned to investigators standing nearby. The verdict was brutal. Without a miracle, Micah had less than 24 hours to live. Jalen and Emily were carried into separate rooms. Both were unconscious, their small bodies curled under white sheets, I-4 lines feeding into thin arms. Nurses adjusted monitors while caseworkers filled clipboards with notes that would one day be filed under neglect. The siblings, once bound together in survival, now lay separated by walls, fighting alone in sterile silence. As doctors battled inside the hospital, detectives built their case outside. Selena's name was already flagged, her face already distributed. They traced her movements through every digital footprint she had left behind. Her credit card had been used in Miami boutiques. Her phone pinged off cell towers along Ocean Drive. Her social media glittered with fresh images of champagne flutes and sunsets, each photo a timestamp that betrayed her location. Flight manifests confirmed the rest. She was in Miami with Derek Vaughn, her younger millionaire companion, and she wasn't hiding, she was flaunting. Miami Beach became the net. Police cruisers moved into position outside the luxury hotel where Selena and Derek had checked in. Tourists strolled past, unaware that one of the nation's most urgent cases was about to break open above their heads. Inside the hotel suite, Selena admired her reflection in a mirror, her new dress spilling over her shoulders like liquid gold. Derek lounged nearby, scrolling through his phone, untouched by the storm building outside. Then the knock came, not from room service, not from a friend. The next sound was the heavy crash of doors forced open, officers flooding into the room, weapons drawn, commands echoing off marble floors. Selena froze, her smile breaking, her body rigid as she was forced against the wall. Derek's expression hardened into cold indifference, his silence louder than any protest. Handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists, steel biting into skin once draped in diamonds. The world of Miami glamour vanished in an instant, and as officers led her toward the flashing lights waiting outside, Selena's lips parted. The words she spoke first were not about Derek, not about herself. They were about the 3 children she had left behind. Her arrest in Miami made headlines within hours. Cameras flashed as she was led from the hotel in handcuffs, her glamorous appearance now framed by the cold steel around her wrists. She was processed quickly. Her name entered into systems that no longer connected her to nightclubs and penthouses, but to charges of neglect, abandonment, and endangerment. Within days, she was placed on a flight back to Atlanta under guard, her extradition handled with the efficiency of a system that wanted answers. Derek Vaughn was never on that plane. The moment police swarmed the hotel, he stepped back, hands raised, his calm demeanor untouched. He claimed ignorance, insisted the children were not his concern, and let lawyers shield him from further questions. By the time Selena landed in Georgia, Derek had already erased her from his world. No contact, no support, no trace. The man she had risked everything for revealed himself in silence, walking away without a backward glance. Back in Atlanta, the true battle was taking place in hospital rooms. Jalen and Emily lay in separate beds, IV lines delivering fluids their bodies had been denied. Slowly, their strength began to return. Jalen's eyes opened first, his small frame still weakened but alive. Emily followed, her stuffed bunny placed gently in her arms by a nurse who understood its weight. Both children were fragile, but doctors spoke of cautious hope. Micah's room told another story. Machines breathed for him, each shallow rise of his chest assisted by wires and tubes. His condition remained critical. Nurses hovered constantly, adjusting numbers on screens, whispering about odds that grew slimmer with every passing hour. The faintest movement of his tiny hand against the sheets was enough to bring staff rushing to his side. As the children fought for survival, another figure entered the story. Marcus Williams, Micah's father, drove from Birmingham the moment news reached him. He arrived at the hospital exhausted, his face carved by fear and guilt. He pressed his hand against the glass of the NICU window, watching his son's fragile body wrapped in wires, the reality of what had been done to him settling like lead in his chest. While Marcus stood over his son, Selena was escorted into Fulton County Courthouse for her first appearance. The atmosphere was electric. Reporters filled the steps, cameras raised, microphones thrust forward. The words "child abandonment" and "Atlanta mother" splashed across every banner. Crowds gathered, shouting, their voices sharp with outrage. Selena kept her chin lifted, but the eyes of the city bore down on her. Inside, the courtroom was tense. The judge presided over a packed gallery, attorneys shuffled papers, and the weight of public attention pressed against every wall. Selena sat beside her public defender, her glamorous image stripped down to an orange jumpsuit and cuffed wrists. She scanned the room, searching for a friendly face, but found only stares of judgment. Then, in the quiet before proceedings began, the prosecutor leaned across the aisle and whispered something to Selena's attorney. Whatever was said drained the color from the defender's face. His hands froze on his papers, his jaw tightening, his posture stiffening as though the weight of an unexpected blow had landed. And Selena, watching his reaction, knew something devastating was coming. Against all medical odds, baby Micah opened his eyes. But for his mother, this miracle would become the centerpiece of her prosecution. In the sterile quiet of the hospital room, monitors beeped in steady rhythm as a nurse leaned over Micah's fragile body. His chest rose unevenly beneath a tangle of wires, his tiny fingers curled weakly at his side. Then, with a flutter that seemed almost impossible, his eyelids lifted. First one, then the other, revealing tired but alive eyes. Doctors called it unexplainable. After days of shallow breathing, with predictions no longer measured in days but in hours, Micah's sudden spark of life stunned the medical staff. The term medically impossible whispered through the ward, but impossible had arrived. The child many feared would never wake had defied every expectation. News of the recovery spread quickly. Marcus Williams was at his son's side within minutes, his hand trembling as he reached for the small fingers that squeezed back against his own. Tears streaked his face as he bent close, the weight of fear lifting with each sign of life. His presence filled the room with a promise that Micah would never again face the world alone. Meanwhile, down the hall, Jalen and Emily were being reunited. Nurses wheeled Emily into her brother's room, placing her bed beside his. The moment they saw one another, both children reached out, their arms tangling as they clung together. Neither spoke, but their silence carried more meaning than words. They had survived the unthinkable, and now, even in weakness, they refused to let go of each other. The miracle of survival became the headline. But outside the hospital, another story was taking shape. Fulton County prosecutors filed formal charges against Selena Harris, 3 counts of child neglect, 3 counts of abandonment, and 3 counts of reckless endangerment. Each charge carried its own weight, but combined, they painted a picture of a crime that went far beyond poor judgment. This was betrayal written into law. The case was immediately labeled the Atlanta abandonment case. National networks picked it up, splashing images of Selena in her Miami nightlife across screens beside photos of her frail children in hospital beds. Commentators debated endlessly. Some called her a monster. Others pointed to desperation, poverty, and a system that had failed long before she boarded a plane. But the outrage was unanimous, and it was fierce. Every court appearance became a media circus. Protesters gathered on courthouse steps, holding signs, chanting for justice. News anchors repeated her name until it became synonymous with abandonment. Public opinion had already delivered its verdict, long before a jury was seated. Inside her holding cell, Selena's lawyer arrived with updates. His expression was drawn, shoulders heavy with exhaustion. He placed a stack of documents on the table and leaned closer, his voice low, his words deliberate. What he told her about the prosecutor's evidence was enough to drain the color from her face, enough to make the walls feel like they were closing in. And in that moment, Selena realized her nightmare had only just begun. 6 months later, Fulton County Superior Court would hear testimony that shocked even veteran prosecutors. This wasn't just about neglect. This was about a choice that nearly killed 3 children. The children entered the courthouse through side doors, no longer frail, but not unscarred. Foster care had given them stability, but it had not erased the past. Jalen carried himself with quiet strength, his eyes still watchful, as though he feared the world might collapse again. Emily clung to her stuffed bunny, its worn ear stitched carefully by a foster mother who understood its importance. Micah, now stronger, toddled clumsily between caregivers, his survival called a miracle, but his future marked by uncertainty. They were healing, but each carried a shadow that would never fully fade. Inside the courtroom, jury selection unfolded. 12 men and women chosen from across the county sat in stiff chairs, the weight of an entire city's judgment hanging over them. Opening statements carved sharp lines. The prosecution painted Selena as a mother who valued luxury over life, a woman whose choices had turned survival into near death. The defense leaned on struggle, desperation, and manipulation, insisting that poverty and pressure had broken her, not malice. The emotional peak came early. On the second day, the prosecution dimmed the lights and projected photographs onto a large screen. Images of the apartment as police found it. Diapers overflowing, trash scattered, children collapsed from hunger. Then, in sharp contrast, Selena's Miami photos appeared, champagne glasses raised, designer dresses glittering, beaches glowing in the background. The room went silent. Jurors shifted uncomfortably, some covering their mouths, others shaking their heads. The contrast was damning. Witnesses followed. Officer Sarah Mitchell testified to the moment she broke down the door, describing the suffocating silence, the sight of a 7-year-old boy begging without words. Mrs. Rodriguez took the stand, her voice steady as she explained the quiet that had gnawed at her, the phone call she knew she had to make. Doctors and nurses described medical charts, survival odds, the fight to save lives too young to fight for themselves. Then came Marcus Williams. He stood tall, his voice breaking only once as he described the moment he pressed his hand against the hospital glass, believing his son might never open his eyes again. He spoke of guilt, of the helplessness of distance, of a father's rage at choices made without his knowledge. His statement cut through the courtroom like a blade, his pain undeniable, his anger uncontainable. The prosecution closed the day with momentum. But as the judge prepared to adjourn, the defense rose calmly, deliberately. They announced that they would be calling a surprise witness. The room shifted instantly. Reporters scribbled notes. Jurors exchanged uncertain glances. And Selena, seated between her attorneys, straightened in her chair as though bracing for something no one else expected. The trial was no longer predictable. The next witness would change everything. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury had reached a decision that would determine whether justice existed for Jalen, Emily, and baby Micah. The courtroom was silent when the defense called their surprise witness. Every camera turned as Derek Vaughn stepped forward, the man whose wealth and charm had lured Selena from her children. But instead of defending her, he dismantled her. Calmly, smoothly, he painted her as desperate, reckless, and obsessed. He claimed he never asked her to abandon her children, that she had insisted she could handle her responsibilities while chasing the lifestyle he offered. Then came the twist that broke the air in the room. Derek revealed that Selena had confided in him about something darker, her plan to leave her children permanently, not just for a week in Miami. According to him, she wanted freedom without strings, a life where her glamorous image wasn't weighed down by mouths to feed. Gasps rippled through the gallery, reporters scribbling furiously as the narrative shifted from neglect to intent. Closing arguments sharpened the divide. The prosecution's voice rose with fire, demanding the maximum penalty. They argued that Selena Harris had chosen luxury over life, wealth over innocence, and that anything less than full accountability would dishonor the suffering her children endured. The defense clung to the argument of pressure, poverty, and manipulation, but the damage was done. The words of Derek Vaughn lingered in the jurors' minds like poison. The jury filed back into the courtroom after 72 hours of silence. Their verdict was swift and final. Guilty on all counts. The sentence followed, 23 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The weight of the decision echoed through the chamber, sealing her fate in cold certainty. For the first time, Selena's composure shattered. She broke down before the judge, her sobs loud, her body shaking, words of apology tumbling into the void. But the children were not there to hear them, and the public would not accept them. To many, her tears were too late. As the gavel prepared to fall, the judge leaned forward, his voice steady but heavy with something more. He hinted at a detail yet to be revealed, a truth buried deeper in Selena's past, a secret that would shock even those who thought they knew the worst of her. The gavel fell, but the story wasn't over, because the three children whose mother chose a millionaire over their lives still had their whole futures ahead of them. In the months following the trial, their names were changed for privacy, their locations withheld from the public. What mattered now was not their past, but the fragile hope of their future. Jalen carried the deepest scars. At just 7 years old, he had taken on the role of protector, shouldering responsibilities no child should ever know. In therapy, he often replayed those days in silence, his voice breaking only when pressed to remember the refrigerator door opening to emptiness. Yet in that trauma lived resilience. Teachers described him as serious, determined, a boy who clung fiercely to the siblings he had nearly lost. His pain was undeniable, but so was his strength. Emily began to heal in quieter ways. For weeks, she spoke little, her voice locked away like the stuffed bunny she never let go. But slowly, under the guidance of gentle therapy, her words returned. She painted pictures, told stories, and began to laugh again in small bursts, as though rediscovering what childhood was meant to be. She would never forget the silence of those 5 days, but she was learning that silence could also hold safety, not just fear. Micah was the miracle. Too young to remember the hunger, too small to hold the memory of his shallow breaths, he thrived in recovery. His body grew stronger, his laughter filled the rooms of the foster home that took all 3 children in. He would never know the full weight of what had nearly ended his life, only the bond of siblings who carried him through it. Together, the 3 formed an inseparable bond, their foster family describing them as unbreakable. No matter where the future carried them, they reached for one another, refusing to be separated. For Jalen and Emily, protecting Micah became not a burden, but a purpose. For Micah, their love became the foundation of a life built on survival and strength. Meanwhile, Marcus Williams fought through the courts for custody of his son. He attended every hearing, every meeting, determined to prove that Micah would never again face neglect under his watch. His love, sharpened by guilt and loss, became his driving force. He could not erase the past, but he was determined to rewrite the future. Inside Georgia Women's Correctional Facility, she lived not as a glamorous figure on Derek's arm, but as inmate number 48162. Her days were measured in routine, her nights in silence. Stripped of freedom, stripped of wealth, stripped of the fantasy she once chased, she was left with the reality of her own choices. 23 years stretched before her like an endless corridor. But prison walls cannot hold secrets forever. During intake interviews, records surfaced that revealed something long hidden. Selena had not abandoned children for the first time. At 21, she had given birth to a child she placed for adoption, walking away before the ink on the papers dried. That decision had been buried in sealed files, but now it emerged, painting her pattern not as a single fall, but as a repeated choice. The revelation shocked even those who believed they had heard the worst. For the public, it was confirmation. For her children, it was a wound they might never understand. And yet, despite it all, the story of Jalen, Emily, and Micah was not one of tragedy alone. It was a story of survival, a story of resilience, a story of children who endured the unthinkable and lived to build a future brighter than the shadows left behind. Because in the end, this story was never about the mother who abandoned them. It was about the 3 children who survived her choice and built new lives filled with strength, with love, and with hope.